Welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining. We'll start in about 4 minutes. Thank you all for being here. We'll start in about 3 minutes. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We'll start in about 2 minutes. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the meeting. We will get started in just about a minute. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining on this Thursday afternoon. We'll give another moment to let other participants trickle in, but we appreciate you being here. All right, everyone. This is a 60-minute webinar, so I think we should dive in. I'm Sophie Glass, a facilitator with Triangle Associates, and I'll be kind of emceeing this meeting. So welcome to your May 9th public webinar focused on local and regional delivery infrastructure needs. Next slide, please. So here are the webinar tools, and I already saw a great question about the chat feature versus the Q&A. We have found that having both going concurrently create kind of a lot of chaos, and we don't know how to prioritize. So the Q&A feature is the tool that participants today can use for questions and comments, and it's really well organized so that we as facilitators can make sure we address things. So please use that. At the very end, we're going to have public comments that the hand raising feature will turn on. And so you can use that and we'll do public comments in the order that it comes in. And if you're someone who is helped through captioning, that is enabled as well. You're welcome to chat the host. If you have anything, our colleague here, Emily Pilchowski, is our tech facilitator. And if you have any issues, she is at the ready to help you. So next slide, please. My request, as always, just be constructive, courteous. This is a public webinar, and so, define your acronyms, all that. It's 60 minutes designed to be digestible and accessible, but it means we may not get to everything. And so that feedback form or the email address is a way to put additional comments. And Emily, can you drop in the participant chat the link to the feedback form and the email address? And let's aim to focus on the topics at hand. Next slide, please. So our safety moment, as we always do, May is National Electrical Safety Month. I feel like it should also be National Allergy Month. So forgive me if I'm blowing my nose here. But in terms of Electrical Safety Month, use outlet covers or caps, keep kids safe, test your smoke alarms monthly, keep kites and balloons away from overhead power lines, don't run those extension cords through water or snow, and wear gloves and footwear when operating electrical tools, and store those away from flammable liquids and gas. Next slide, please. So who's on the lineup today? This is all a PSE staff-driven meeting. So I'll be kicking us off, but then we'll turn to Kara Durbin, who's the Director of Clean Energy Strategy. Then we'll hear from Brian Tyson, who's the Manager of Clean Energy Planning and Implementation. Next, we'll hear from Eleanor, who's the Manager of Transmission Strategy and Planning. And last, we'll hear from Reed, who's the Manager of Grid Modernization Strategy and Enablement. So next slide, please. We'll kick it off with Kara, like I said, spend about 10 minutes hearing from Brian about the CETA, so the Clean Energy Transformation Act context when it comes to delivery infrastructure. Eleanor will talk about the regional grid at that overview level. Reed will zoom in and talk about the local grid. And then, of course, we'll end with public comment to hear from all of you. Next slide. So today's meeting really falls under the inform and consult side of this spectrum about public participation. So a lot of information will be shared, but through the Q&A feature, the public comment at the end, and the feedback form, if you have any recommendations for PSE on how to evolve their work, please send that in. Next slide, please. All right, Kara, I'll turn it to you.
Okay, thanks, Sophie. Can you hear me okay? So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to be very brief and just really wanted to briefly touch on some upcoming meetings we have planned to discuss how we think about and consider equity in our integrated resource planning process. So our resource planning team has really been working to evolve the approach that we used in the 2023 Electric Progress Report for integrating equity into that analysis. So later this month, we'll begin a series of meetings with our equity advisory group and another webinar and with our RPEG to really discuss this further. We originally were considering just 3 meetings, but we've decided to break out the equity advisory group discussion into 2 meetings instead of just 1. And that's really just so we can give some more time to both of these topics and allow for that feedback loop. So we really hope this series of meetings will be a great opportunity to get feedback, really from hopefully a diverse and engaged audience, including the public. So during these meetings, we'll be talking about how we are evolving the scorecard approach we used for the electric IRP, how we may be able to use something similar for the gas side. And we'll also talk about how we can continue to improve upon the electric analysis as we think about what equity considerations might look like for generic resources. So just really wanted to alert you of this series of meetings that's coming up. And we look forward to see many of you, hopefully, at the webinar we have next month on June 6th, which I'm sure will be here before we know it. So Sophie, that's it from me. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Kara. I don't see any questions and answers about kind of the equity process or the equity steps coming forward. So I think we can carry on to the next slide. All right, Brian, you're up next.
Okay, thank you, Sophie. Good afternoon, everyone. As Sophie said, my name is Brian Tyson here at PSE, and I want to sort of set the stage before we get into the discussion with Eleanor and Reed. I really want to have a conversation, more of a background on CETA and more specifically the CEIP and the targets and goals that we put forth. We really think we got to start there because then that gives you an understanding of the magnitude of the change and the transition and how it directly correlates with the regional grid, transmission grid, and then the distribution grid as well, which we'll hear about later on. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So first I'll start with our CEIP, our Clean Energy Implementation Plan. This is a plan we put forth back in 2021 that really laid out some of the foundational goals and targets that we were looking to achieve in this CETA compliance period by the end of 2025. So we're looking to move towards nearly 63% by the end of 25, but also the CETA statute asks us to move towards carbon neutrality by 2030, so moving to 80% and then moving to 100% by 2045. So I threw out a lot of numbers there between 63 and 80 and 100%. And so really we've got to think about over the next 4 years, how are we going to build closer and closer to that 80 and that 100%? And so we lay that out by looking at various targets within the all the above approach for clean, renewable, and non-emitting resources. So we think about the utility scale resources and how far we might be able to go in 2025. We think about distributed resources, both solar and storage. We think about demand response and energy efficiency, which also may help decrease the load that we may see. And again, it's just we want to emphasize here is that it's not just the large scale utility resources, which may use a lot of the transmission upgrades or projects that will be discussed later on, but it's also the distributed resources, some of those local generation that also are going to require some upgrades as well. The other piece about CETA, the really core tenet there is thinking about making sure all customers receive benefits, equitably distribute those benefits across all our customers as we move forward in this transition. So we have to think about that not only as we set the targets, but also think about it as we move forward in our distribution and transmission projects that will be discussed later on. We can go to the next slide, please. So here it gives you a bit of a illustration of the magnitude, as I mentioned, of meeting 80% and 100%. We have to think about not just the large scale wind facilities, but also we have to think about some of the storage, both a large scale storage and distributed storage. We have to think about some of the community solar projects that may also help bring generation from a local perspective, but will have impacts on our distribution grid, and we'll have to make changes and upgrades there to facilitate some of these newer projects to come online. So as you can see, it's a really big jump just to get to 2030 and to get to 2045. And I'm going to pause there to see if we have any questions.
Yeah. So Brian, I see one question in the chat from Thomas. Does almost doubling by 2030 mean adding almost 6 gigawatts to the existing 6 gigawatts or more because of existing resources going away?
Oh, thank you for the question, Thomas. So our current generation capacity is about 6,000 megawatts, so about 6 gigawatts. And so in that first part, yes, we need to add 6 gigawatts on top of our existing facility. However, you're right in the aspect that we are going to have some resources go away as well. And so I think it's important that we recognize that, yes, we want to get the 6 gigawatts, but we may have to do more because we're also diminishing our existing set of resources as well.
Great. Thanks for that, Brian. Next up here from Adrian about, has PSE heard the clear criticism of the CEIP, Clean Energy Implementation Plan, from interrogatories, great word, that it is far too ambitious in its targets, especially for distributed energy resources and energy efficiency? Thoughts on that one, Brian?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I'll say that we've heard a number of critiques, criticism, praise from both sides in terms of our targets in the CEIP. We're really focused on moving towards a cleaner portfolio, and we know that's going to take a mix of resources, but we know that it's a really big challenge ahead of us. And so we're really trying to look at what's out there, what's feasible, how can we get ahead and start to bring in some of those resources, and more importantly, working with all of our customers and all of our external parties as we make some of these ambitious goals and targets.
Great. And then this last question here from Thomas. Will all new resources be PSE owned within PSE's transmission distribution area, or will some of these be PPAs, power purchasing agreements, from outside requiring transmission over BPA or other transmission line?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I will say it's a bit of a mix, because again, we can't just really focus in on just one way to do this. So it's a mix of owning a building and PPAs and transmission lines. Now we know going back to the previous question, we know there's going to be challenges with each of those. So we've got to be able to balance a number of different factors and variables as we make some of those decisions. But at this point, we're looking at all those various areas to be able to feasibly move towards those targets.
Great. And we do have time for this one last question. If you're the right person to answer, Jim Adcock asks, if Puget has this much work to do, then why were not more of the previous round of RFP bids accepted?
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think because we are currently in the midst of evaluating bids, I don't know that we can't talk much about that process right now. There will be an opportunity at the end of that bidding process where we will submit sort of an evaluation report on what happened throughout that process. But just because we're in the midst of that process right now, we can't really talk too much about that. I appreciate the question, though.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Brian, for answering all those questions on the spot. I am not seeing anything else in the Q&A. So I'll just talk really slowly for a moment to see if anyone else is going to ask one. And if not, thank you for your time, Brian, and we'll go to the next slide and move along. All right, Eleanor, take it away.
Thank you, Sophie. So I'm Eleanor Uri, and I'm the Manager of Transmission Strategy and Planning here at PSE, and I'll be discussing how the regional grid plays into our IRP process and our acquisition of resources. So if we can move to the next slide. So when PSE is acquiring resources to serve our customers and meet our CETA targets, we really need to consider the location of those resources and how we can deliver power from where it's being generated to where it's being used by our customers. And so the electric grid, which is made up of all of those wires that connect those resources to our load center, that's a critical part of meeting our resource needs. And particularly, we're focused on those high capacity, long distance transmission lines. And it's really important to consider that there are limitations on the amount of power that those transmission lines can carry, and that can end up being a key constraint in our ability to deliver resources into the Puget Sound area. So if we can go to the next slide. So the map on the left side of this slide highlights all of the different electric utilities that make up what we call the Western Interconnection. And PSE's service territory is that very upper left-hand corner of the map in that rust red color. And so compared to the entire Western Interconnection, the PSE service territory covers a relatively small area. And generally, most of the transmission lines that PSE owns and operates are located within our service territory, within that very small area. And so when it comes to acquiring those utility scale resources that would enable our clean energy goals, those resources are going to be scattered throughout the Western interconnection, and PSE is really going to need to work with our neighboring utilities to secure the transmission needed to deliver them into our service territory so that we can then deliver it to our customers. And before we move on from this slide, I do want to highlight the light blue area that encompasses a lot of Washington and Oregon and kind of surrounds all of those Washington utilities. And that's the Bonneville Power Administration, and I'll refer to them as BPA for some slides. And they really are a significant regional transmission provider that we partner with. And we'll discuss BPA and their role in the regional grid in a later slide. So if we can move on to the next slide. All right. So as I mentioned in the previous slide, PSE is going to need to acquire resources from across the Western interconnection. And within our resource planning process, we've identified 9 regions that have a high potential for renewable resource development. And those are identified in those blue ovals on the map. And so you can see that there are areas that are identified in parts of Washington that are located east of the Cascade Mountains, but we're also looking as far away as Montana and Wyoming. And so these locations are very geographically diverse, and they're generally located outside of our service territory. And the types of resources that we're looking at are wind and solar resources, and that includes the ability to utilize what we call hybrid resources. So if we were to have wind paired with storage or solar paired with storage, so that we can maximize the use of that resource. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so as I mentioned in previous slides, PSE's service territory is relatively small, and the transmission lines that PSE owns and operates are primarily located within our service territory, which is that blue bubble labeled PSE on the map. And in order to tap into those resources in those 9 regions that I just touched on, PSE would need to partner with neighboring entities and utilize that broader regional transmission system to bring those resources to our customers. And that regional system is owned in large part by Bonneville Power, as I mentioned a couple slides ago. And BPA is a federal agency, and they originally developed that regional transmission grid to deliver hydropower from the Columbia River to the load centers like the Seattle area. And so when we think about how the regional system works, we're largely moving power from east to west over the Cascade Mountains. And there's a total of 10 high capacity transmission lines that cross the Cascade Mountains from the Columbia River into the Puget Sound area. And so if you think about it, those lines roughly run in parallel, and collectively we refer to that set of 10 lines as the west of Cascades North path. So as you're driving across I-90 over Snoqualmie Pass and you see those big lattice structures, those are the BPA lines that are delivering that hydropower. And unfortunately, the amount of power that can flow on that path is a finite amount. And there is no more room on those lines to bring any additional resources over from the east. And so while this map highlights the resource locations in central and eastern Washington and the need for those resources to come over the Cascade Mountains, the same is true for those resources that are coming from as far away as Montana and Wyoming. And so given that anticipated future demand for capacity on this path, BPA has been investigating opportunities to increase the capacity on this path, but it is going to require some pretty significant transmission builds. And the current estimated timeline for those builds is the 2038 timeframe. And there is a little bit of uncertainty in these projects and whether they'll move forward. And so PSE is going to need additional capacity on a much faster timeframe than BPA can deliver it. So if we want to move to the next slide. So given the constraints on the regional transmission system that I just touched on, PSE is looking at several options in the next IRP for how we increase our ability to bring new resources into the PSE system. And so one option is to co-locate resources to be able to optimize the transmission. So what that means is when we're planning resource procurement, we try to match the resource to the amount of transmission capacity that's available. So for example, if there's 100 megawatts of capacity that we could use to get from, say, Montana to the Puget Sound area, we would only plan to procure 100 megawatts of generation from that region. Understanding that there's going to be times when that resource isn't available and that transmission would not be used or would be marketed. So with co-location, we might go and procure 100 megawatts of wind, but we also might go and procure 100 megawatts of solar, knowing that those diverse resources might operate at different times of the day and allow us to better utilize that 100 megawatts of transmission. Another option is to wait until BPA is able to complete their transmission upgrades like that we just discussed. But this would pretty significantly affect our ability to acquire the resource mix that we need. The third option is for PSE to consider building long distance transmission lines ourselves that we would own and operate. And this is a departure from our current practices of relying on that regional transmission system. And then the fourth option is for PSE to partner with BPA on some sort of joint solution that may speed up that 2040 timeline. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions.
Thanks so much, Eleanor. There is a question in the chat about biodiesel and whether that's being considered as a renewable energy source, and PSE in the background is finding that information. So just stay tuned. And I know that's Eleanor, that's kind of out of your wheelhouse. We have other questions here. Adrian asks a question. Is the evidence we're all now continually inundated by of extreme weather disasters in the US and worldwide that are being accelerated, compounded, and amplified by catastrophic anthropogenic global heating that are already outpacing the IPCC's most pessimistic projections, now sufficient to cause PSE to sharpen focus not only on meeting the CEIP goals, but by how much and how quickly it could potentially exceed them? I don't know if, Eleanor, this is a question for you, or if anyone else on PSE want to jump in on thoughts around meeting versus exceeding.
I would likely need to defer to somebody else for that.
I think that's fair. That's a pretty big question.
Yeah.
Adrian, I'm going to let PSE sort it out in the background for a moment. Either we'll write something live, feedback report, will come back to it, but the question has been registered. So next, a question from Joel. Given the barriers to transmission development, what alternatives to new transmission builds is PSE exploring in the 2025 IRP? For example, grid enhancing technologies or storage as a transmission asset. Eleanor, is this in your wheelhouse, or should we phone a friend?
I'd like to phone a friend on the IRP team if possible.
Yeah. So let's phone Philip, who's always my go-to phone a friend. Philip, you want to come on camera real quick?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm Philip Popoff, Director of the Resource Planning and Analytics Group. So we're talking about the Joel Nightingale's question on the given the transmission barriers. Yeah, I think that as Eleanor mentioned, we're definitely looking into the different alternatives for packing more renewable energy behind the same transmission lines. You don't get the same type of reliability benefits that you get because you can only get, in an example, I'm going to put 200 megawatts of resources behind a 100 megawatt transmission line. Well, that's not as good as a 200 megawatt power plant. But if it's a wind or a solar farm, we may be able to get more energy, renewable energy, maybe not at peak, but during other periods. So that's certainly one. you know, the ideas of reconductoring existing transmission lines with different kinds of material are certainly ideas that we are considering. The feasibility of those is something that we'll have to determine.
Thank you so much, Philip. All right, so we're going to keep moving through these. So slide 18, which is the one we're on, lists transmission options PSE is exploring. Why is the Western Transmission Expansion Coalition, WESTEC, thank you for the acronym, not listed? Will PSE be part of the Western Resource Adequacy Program called the RAP, rather than relying on BPA, which won't add capacity until 2040, or self-building? I think this is a very pertinent question to some of the work that the Resource Planning Advisory Group is going to talk about soon. Eleanor, is this a you or should I? That's a you. Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so PSE has been very engaged in the WESTEC effort. We were actually one of the original participants as that group was being stood up, and they are making great progress towards developing what the outcome of that committee is going to be. So we've been continuing to be engaged and hope to help inform and drive some of the decisions, the plans that come out of that. And I can say we are also engaged with the RAP program. Yeah, I hopefully that answers the question.
Yep.
Okay.
That sounds good. Okay. Thanks so much for that. We'll just note that. I am going to go back in time a little bit to address what Adrian was saying. Kara, would you mind coming online?
Yeah, absolutely. So Adrian, appreciate the question, and we certainly share your concerns about the impacts of climate change. And we are we're taking really an all of the above approach in developing our clean energy goals, our plans, and doing what we can to make progress towards our ambitious goals that we have in our current plan, and as we move forward towards carbon neutrality in 2030. We are growing. We need to do this in a way that is reliable and affordable for our customers. And so to your question of can we go faster, I think that's going to be an ongoing conversation over the next several years as we figure out the pace that we can go at, the pace that our regulator, the commission, is comfortable with, and again, how we do this in a way that is safe and reliable and equitable. So I think my answer is I appreciate the question, and we will remain committed to moving as quickly as we reasonably can. Thank you.
Thanks, Kara. So next we have a question from Jim Adcock. So Jim writes, when I look at the BPA Bonneville Power Association administration hourly reports of how much power they are transmitting on their various power lines, what I see is that most of the hours of the day, month, and year, those transmission lines are not at capacity. Can you please clarify why you cannot send renewable power over these lines on the vast majority of hours when those lines are not actually operating at capacity? Philip spoke to this a little bit. Eleanor, do you want to just kind of put a finer point on it?
I think Philip covered it pretty well. I would say that, that this is a great question, and I think, what we're trying to accomplish is really being able to serve our load at all hours of the day. And there are certainly times when that path is constrained and the capacity is allocated. And so, we need to think about other ways that we can meet our energy needs utilizing that system.
Great. Thanks for the follow-up, Eleanor, on that one. All right. Very good. So here we are at 4:30. We were expecting just to have 5 more minutes with you, Eleanor, which is another way of saying we have time for other questions. PSE is working hard on shrinking the content to leave room for more Q&A. So I'll just look around. I'm not seeing anything. So Eleanor, oh, let's see. I got a little thing here. Okay, so Jim Adcock was specifically asking about sending renewable power over these lines, not meeting peak capacity requirements. Philip, could I get you to come back on maybe and expand a little bit?
Sure. Good afternoon. Thank you for the question. Yeah, that's really was specifically what I was talking about is that we are looking into whether we can pack basically the transmission system with using non-firm transmission for non-firm energy. So that's definitely something that we're looking into. So it's possible that then the challenges are, well, if the wind isn't blowing, right? The reason why there might not be any the lines might be empty is because the wind isn't blowing. And so if we put more wind farms when the wind isn't blowing, there won't be any more energy flowing. Similarly, I put solar at night, the transmission line is still going to be empty. But that's absolutely, I think, given BPA's position about how long it will take to build transmission, that's absolutely something that we will be looking into in a lot of detail. I think it may be a very important component of our ability to meet the CETA targets.
Well, Eleanor and Philip, thank you for those answers and for your presentation, Eleanor. I think we've cleared out all the questions and we can go to the next slide and next presentation. All right, Reed, you're up.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So today I'll be talking about the local, providing an overview of the local grid. Be talking a little bit more about what that delivery system is, why it's critical to achieve our clean energy goals, why the grid is a critical component to achieve our clean energy goals, and what PSE is doing today to prepare the grid for the future. Next slide. And to kind of start us off, I figured I'd start us off with one of these slides that kind of provides a good overview of our service territory, covering 8 counties that we serve electric and 6 counties that we serve natural gas across the 6,000 square miles of Western Washington. So you can see the color-coded graph there, and the tan is where we have our electric. We do serve over 1.2 million electric customers and nearly 900,000 natural gas customers. Some numbers for you there. And thinking about the delivery system, we do have about 2,600 miles of electric transmission and 23,700 miles of electric distribution. And to put that into perspective of around the world, if you were to line up all of our poles and our cables around the world, it would actually wrap around one full rotation, the Earth's equator. So a very, very vast system. Next slide. And so with the help of some icons, I'm going to provide a quick overview about the journey of how power is generated and eventually delivered to our customers. And so like Brian talked about, the need for the clean energy resources that we need to acquire and also to meet our goals. There on the left-hand side is the big generation resources that we need to go and find. Right next to it, you see the bigger transmission that Eleanor talked about. These are the large, high-capacity transmission lines bringing that generation to our PSE bubble. And that's kind of where our local delivery system starts. And so the power then flows from those big transmission lines into transmission substations, these little boxes with T's on them, bring the power from a higher voltage down to a lower voltage, then travel through a network of a lower voltage transmission system, a number of transmission lines, to then carry them to the next hub where you have numerous distribution substations, which are these smaller boxes with the D's on them, that will serve customers or communities probably within a 5 to 10 mile radius from that substation location. Just for a metric here, PSE has approximately 250 of these distribution substations spread across our service territory. That just gives you an idea of how much of those electrical hubs that we have serving communities. Then the power leaves those distribution substations on distribution overhead conductors. Most of you all are familiar with seeing these power lines running through your neighborhoods, unless they're running underground, in which you might not necessarily see the conductors, but you'll see, green power boxes or green electrical boxes that might be stationed next to different facilities. And that delivery system, the distribution end of where those poles and cables or overhead conductors and cables are, is approximately 24,000 miles of lines, makes up most of our delivery system. Then finally, the power then goes into a last set of transformers, which you would see hanging on a pole, which are those small cylinder hanging on the poles or the green pad mounted boxes, to bring your voltage once again down so that it can be safely delivered to the appropriate level for our customers. And so there on the right hand side is our customer base. There you see that the two arrows there. That presents one of the challenges, is that not only are we challenged with serving increasing loads for our customers, so that the delivery system has to serve increasing loads for our customers, such as electric heat pumps and for air conditioning and heating, commercial building electrification, adoption of new EVs for homes, at the fleet level, as well as kind of the uprise of AI and data analytics, demanding for more cloud computing, so more data centers. And so that need for that one traditional power flow of increasing loads compacted with the complexities of now residential, commercial, industrial, solar, and batteries, pushing that power back onto the grid to help serve some of that clean energy generation need from the distributed level. And so you're kind of going two ways, and the grid has to be able to accommodate the normal flow towards customers, but as well as back onto the grid from customers. And that presents a challenge for how are we going to make sure that the grid has what it needs to accommodate two-way power flow. You can go to the next slide. One of the things, in my mind, one of the foundational things that PSE is working on is just to be able to make sure we sustain our grid, are some of the different grid modernization programs that we work on an annual basis. Here is just a good diagram of just an overview of the different programs that PSE is working on. Go ahead and click the screen there, have some animation for you. There we go. And so certain programs like our aging infrastructure programs, like our pole inspection and replacement program, and our cable remediation program, where we're identifying equipment at the end of its life and proactively replacing them before they fail, before they cause an extended outage to our customers. Go ahead, next slide. One more time. We're also replacing equipment within our substations. Some of these substations were installed back in the 1960s, and they're definitely end of life. We're prioritizing and making sure we're looking into some of our most critical assets, like transformers and breakers, protective relays, so that we can make sure we're staying ahead and keeping up with technology to make sure that these are, because they're our most highest impact assets, they have the highest value to reliability for our customers. Next. One more time. We're also investing into hardening our grid on the distribution level, looking into where we can upgrade small conductor, adding covered conductor, also called tree wire, to prevent tree limbs from causing outages, as well as targeted undergrounding. We're specifically doing this in targeted areas where we have poor system reliability, or areas where a concentrated area of customers are seeing repeat a high number of outages. And recently, with the risks around wildfire, how we can continue to do some of those proactive measures to mitigate some of that risk around wildfire. Next. One more time. And then we're also installing sectionalizing devices such as reclosers and fuse savers, which are devices that we can place on our system to help automatically open and close and automatically restore customers for possible temporary issues, maybe a tree branching the line and falling to the ground. We want to be able to minimize the impact to customers and get that the power restored within seconds. And these devices can actually do that. And so PSE in general, we're doing a lot around just being able to sustain the grid, a lot of investments to keeping the grid safe, reliable, efficient, which is a bare minimum to what our grid needs to achieve for our future. Next slide. And so part of the strategy of what we now that we have a foundation of sustaining our grid, we now can then take the next steps to advancing some of those capabilities. And well, like I mentioned before, is we need to make sure we can enable that two-way power flow of where we're be able to enable clean energy from both big generation and also customer-sided DERs. And go ahead and click next slide. One of the foundations of our advancement capabilities is around data and foundational technology. And some of the things that we have been doing is installing AMI meters, which give us the data intervals of 50-minute data intervals for usage at our customer level. We're also installing line sensors across our grid so that we can better understand where power is flowing and what the health is of our system across our service territory. And then we're also upgrading relays and controllers within those transmission and distribution substations so we can better plan and operate our grid more efficiently. Next. And then the next tier or the next level is being able to, too much there, is being able to enable our automation and optimization capabilities. This is where we can provide some of the self-healing grid capabilities that automatically reroute power to get most, if not all, our customers back on after an outage occurs. And then with that granularity level of data that we've gotten from some of our sensors and our meters, we can actually also optimize our voltage levels on our grid that ultimately then provide energy savings back to our customers, and then as well as PSE's grid. And then next. Lastly, I think once we get some of these components through, the third tier is really being able to enable these distributed energy resources or DERs. We can need to stand up platforms to operate them and operationalize them, like our virtual power plant. This allows us to enable customers to participate and contribute to meeting our energy goals. So thermostats, smart water heaters, these are all devices that within people's homes that can be enrolled in our virtual power plant. Next slide. And so when we coordinate some of these grid modernization programs that helped us to sustain just the basic functions of our grid, as well as pour into the investments of our data and foundational technologies, our grid automation and optimization capabilities, and then ultimately enable the DERs onto our grid, we can then begin to orchestrate some of the capabilities between our customer devices, customer DERs, as well as our PSE utility-ended DERs, so that we can really start to optimize and balance some of the contributions to that our clean energy goals. So we can see thermostats, hot water heaters, solar batteries, EV chargers, and microgrids all working in harmony together. And that's kind of our future vision of how we're able to bring these DERs together. Next slide. And this last slide is just a quick 5-year snapshot of kind of what our journey looks like, specifically around the DER technology that we have to enable to be able to get to our future state. And we talked about data. We also need to stand up modeling and planning capabilities as well. But I don't want to spend too much time going through the details of this list here, but I'll just hone in on one specific one that I personally am excited about. Is down towards the bottom. We do have our Tenino and Bakota microgrids. These are two sites at 1 megawatt each, where we have a battery. One at Tenino, we have a battery at 1 megawatt and a solar combo, so that we can actually use this microgrid to serve the Tenino High School as an emergency shelter. And so during a major event, we can actually backfeed the Tenino High School as that emergency backup center for 2 to 3 days. And then the second microgrid site, which is at small town of Bakota, which is just south of the Tenino area, serves about 275 customers and provides resilience in an area where it does get, because of its remote location, does see a number of outages. So we can keep the lights on for that set of customers. And we've been learning a lot about the planning process. We've been learning a lot about complex, studies involved for batteries. And so it's been a great project, and it's been funded by the Washington State Department of Commerce, co-funded. So it's been a great project. Kind of see the development and the growth, and we'll definitely set PSE up for success for future battery projects. And that's all I had.
Great.
On this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reed. And I love some good animations, the way you use them. So I just want to note that questions can be answered live. We're also answering them in the chat. Like, for example, thank you, Michael, for your question about biodiesel and whether it's considered for a renewable energy source. Meredith answered it in the chat because she wanted to include a link to the public webinar, so to learn a little bit more. So just a note about that. And then for those of you who aren't following the Q&A, the questions that Thomas asked, so how much of the required resource doubling by 2030 or 15 gigawatts required by 2045, slide 2, can be achieved by the technologies discussed in the local grid overview? Great question. PSE has to do a little bit of research to figure out the exact answer, so they're going to respond in that feedback report that will be ready shortly after this meeting. And then another question just in the chat so everyone can hear it. Thomas also asked, are the 2,600 miles of transmission in PSE's delivery system, are they owned by PSE or some BPA? They're all PSE owned. All right. So then let's see other questions here. So Reed, one coming up for you, and I'll note we have about 2 minutes for the remaining questions. Why are we not hearing much more about work with third parties to boost microgrid development? Only 2 sites. And why are you talking about our, in quotes, virtual power plant when third parties like Tesla are far ahead of PSE with realizing such concept? Reed, if you are able to answer now, great. If not, we can punt this one to the feedback report.
Yeah, I can provide some background. I mean, PSE specifically has been working a lot on developing our own capabilities around microgrid development. We also have a few other projects where we have partnered with other third parties for microgrids. So 2 sites is specifically this one project, but we have other projects in the queue as well around microgrids. So it's not just these 2. And then around our virtual power plants, it is PSE's virtual power plant. But yes, we are working with a third-party entity, multiple OEMs and third-party entities to work directly with the customers to trigger these different events.
And then last question, Reed, in the time we have, the local grid planning schedule, so on the slide we're on right now, seems to peter out with 2 small microgrids and enabling of a DER, distributed energy resources management system. Where is the planning, design, and construction of transmission capacity within PSE's delivery system? Reed, is this a you question or a phone a friend?
if it's related to transmission capacity, I might ask Eleanor or someone from transmission
Great.
to support.
Eleanor, you're welcome to come on and answer in 30 seconds, or we can punt it to the feedback report at the time.
Sorry, I'm looking at the question again. Yeah, I think we'll need to punt that to the feedback report for now.
Thomas, thanks for the question. I know PSE staff will work behind the scenes to give you an answer. I did want to move us along because we commit to giving you all a chance to have the mic. And so next slide, and thank you, Reed. Next slide, please. Okay, so that feedback form, so if you think of anything else, you have feedback for PSE, you have until May 16th, or of course, you can always send an email at that email address. And then someone mentioned the Western Resource Adequacy Program earlier. There will be an overview of the RAP at the next Resource Planning Advisory Group meeting on May 14th. So those are some upcoming dates in this process. Next slide. Okay, so Emily, can I ask you to allow the raise hand feature to go on? Looks like you did, because I see some hands coming in. Very nice, everyone. I'm going to just get my timer going. I see 2 hands raised. Beautiful. Let me share my screen. All right, I'm stealing the screen share from. Beautiful. Well, Jim, we had you first. I'm going to just promote you to allow you to talk. So your 2 minutes will start when I hear your voice.
Okay, yeah, I just want to spend a few seconds to clarify. We hear a lot about this idea that transmission lines are full up, there's nothing you can do. I'm going to post a link to the BPA site where they discuss their and showed their actual transmission line capacities. I'm not talking basically for Puget's benefit, but for the members, anybody else on this group, including UTC staff. Utilities often talk about a transmission line being full, or they talk about a transmission line as being fully subscribed or whatever. The simple reality is you look at most lines most of the time, and they're running virtually empty. So with modern technologies like battery, where you can shift the use of transmission lines or sending power over transmission lines off of those few peak hours of the day or the year, where it's an extremely hot day during the summer and an extremely cold day during the winter. Those lines are almost all of them are very lightly used, and if you could get the PPA and the different utilities to agree on how these things are used, they're pretty wide open for sending renewable power over them most of the time. It's just a question of agreeing how those transmission lines are going to be used. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Jim. And I see PSE taking that in. So, and Jim, yeah, just place the resources in that Q&A feature, and then everyone will be able to see it. Next up, we have Thomas Kramer. I'm going to just promote Thomas, allow him to speak. Thomas, I'll start your timer when I can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Tom Kramer with Third Act, Washington. And I just wanted to follow up on one of my questions, which was how much of the resources needed for the doubling by 2030 and the ultimate need for 15 gigawatts by 2045, how much of those can be provided by things like DERs and demand response and storage within PSE's existing delivery system without going outside for regional transmission needs. It seems like those kind of things can be evaluated independently and immediately of any need for coordinating and planning, cooperating with other utilities, with BPA, with FERC, and anyone else outside of PSE. So those things are things that can be done first in order to determine what contributions from regional resources outside of PSE will be needed. Thank you. That's all I had to say.
Thanks a lot, Tom. Appreciate that follow-up. We have time for another public comment, but I am not seeing any other hands, so I'll just give everyone another moment here. All right. Not seeing anyone else. Let me stop sharing the screen so I can see people a little bit better. Stop share. And just wrap us up with a hearty thank you to the presenters and for the participants. We're trying out different times of day just to see what works for people and all the rest. So thank you for meeting with us on late on the day on a Thursday, and for just kind of your continued involvement in this public webinar series. So with that, we'll wish everyone a wonderful afternoon. And if you missed anything today, you know that this is all on the YouTube channel, so you can check it out there. Thanks a lot, everyone.